Hello there, and welcome, gentle viewers, to another episode of Prolix, Comix, Bollix, the show where myself, Nicholas O'Shenanigans, and himself,
Clive, or what's something that starts with D? That's a synonym for shenanigans. Whatever it is, that's me.
Okay. So this time we're here to talk about, we're here to talk about a comic adaptation of a novella, which has also been adapted into a film. And I think we decided that we wanted to talk about all three.
Yes, I think it would be too thin gruel to spread it out across three separate 2-minute shows. So
yes, yeah. And so what we're talking about here officially is this, which is I don't know if you can see that. That's Harlan Ellison and Richard Corben's Vic and Blood: The Continuing Adventures of a Boy and His Dog, which is basically all of, at this point, there has been a version published since then, which I would have loved to have read, called Blood's a Rover, which is basically a fix-up of all the extant Vic and Blood material that exists. The only thing that's missing from the version that Clive and I read is a teleplay for a 1-hour TV pilot to an unproduced NBC TV series that was going to follow on from the movie, basically. Although I don't know that they were going to bring back Miami Vice Don Johnson or not.
Is that different from, because there was also apparently going to be a sequel film, A Girl and His Dog.
Well, yeah. So apparently, originally it was written as this TV pilot, and then I think they were going to maybe retro do it into a movie instead when it wasn't picked up, and ultimately it never happened. So
there seems to be something in the works at the moment, though, isn't there? There's some sort of again, these things come and go, but there's something over at the IMDb, like in production or in development or something like that.
Could well be. I mean, the script exists, and it's the issue is that Bloods Are Over, which has been published twice now, is published both times in a tiny print run, which has immediately sold out and then started commanding ridiculous prices. Yes. And I was unprepared to spend $173 to read the 1970s teleplay.
Yes, no, I think that's sensible. Bloods Are Over, also the title of a James Elroy novel.
Yes, and it comes originally from some piece of poetry.
Right. So, which we're both blanking on.
Yes. Yeah.
So there you go. You've come to the right place for.
Oh yes.
The
definitive
info. The definitive take on two old geezers half remembering things.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, do you want to introduce Harlan Ellison to our viewers there, Clive?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really very I'm not very up on of course I know who Harlan Ellison is, and I've read this, and then I've read, oddly enough, one of his juvenile delinquent novels that was re-released by Hardcase Crime. I think it was called Web of the City, maybe, and it had a couple of his JD short stories, and it was pretty good, actually. I have to admit. And were there maybe some Harlan Ellison JD stories in that huge of manhunt thing we read?
I think there was. Yes, I think there was something by him in there for sure.
Because it's confusing, right? Because there's also Hal Ellison, right, who was the guy who wrote a lot of JD stuff.
I wonder, did he write the really intense one about the guy who basically tied up a guy in a warehouse and then released a bunch of rats?
That might be Harlan Ellison, yes.
Yeah, I feel like that was his, and it was one of the best, most edgy stories in the book. Unfortunately, I can't necessarily say that I can bring much more to the table either. I mean, I'm not wrong in thinking that he's the one that there was some litigious stuff back and forward, because didn't he not write a teleplay for The Outer Limits that was kind of lifted by Cameron when he wrote
Terminator? Yes. And of course he wrote some Star Trek episodes and And
yeah,
yeah, I have read like bits and pieces here and there. It's just I don't feel as if I've ever sat down and like read like a like a really great like Harlan Ellison novel. And I don't even know if he has written novels, right? But I get the feeling he's more well known as a short story guy.
I think so.
And almost as well known for just being a cantankerous old git.
Yes.
As much as anything else.
Yes.
But an entertainingly cantankerous. I have no idea what Harlan Ellison looks like, but for some reason, when I think of Harlan Ellison, what I see is Brother Theodore for some reason.
Yes. If Brother Theodore and Mark E. Smith at his kind of skinniest,
right,
made love and had a baby, I feel like it would be something that'd be a kind of there. And so one thing I bought actually not that long ago, I haven't had a chance to read yet, but maybe because I'm interested in potentially we might do this later on, but it's quite big.
That sounds good.
But there's a lot of interesting writers in here, and so I think he's also well known as an editor, right?
Yes.
Along with our beloved Michael Moorcock, who was kind of the British, new wave sci-fi guy. He was kind of the American, so he was championing
Michael Moorcock, also the chill version of Harlan Ellison.
Yes, slightly less full on.
If you go to the SF temple, on each side as you enter, you get the and the ah. Harlan Ellison's ah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So in any case, in a second, I'm going to ask you how you came to first either see the movie or see the comic book. Now, I'm struggling to remember whether I read the Richard Corben comics before I saw the movie or not.
When did the comics, which we're primarily apparently supposed to be talking about, when did they actually come out originally?
I think in the early 80s.
Okay.
At least some of them. And then this book, this Vic and Blood kind of continuing adventures, seems to be a later thing, maybe from the 90s. That was where they put them all together into one book, colorized them.
Yes.
And then Harlan Ellison wrote some sort of interstitial, the wit and wisdom of Blood segments for it.
To be honest, even though it's nice to have it all in one place and everything like that, I mean, basically though, that's all you need, as far as I'm concerned, is the original black and white comics. The colorization does nothing for me, really.
Okay, I didn't mind. I didn't
mind it, but it's just I think its natural state are those original black and white comics.
Right.
I think.
The benefit, I suppose, of this version is that it also includes the text versions of the stories, which I wasn't sure where else to find them.
I was quite surprised because I did see the movie first, and then I wasn't even aware there was a comic until you brought it up, and then read the comic and the novel more or less the same time for this and watched the movie again. But so the novella, which is from I say novella, I would call it a long short story.
I would agree. Yeah.
From 1969, and I don't know. Obviously, it's been collected in some Harlan Ellison, but where did it came out somewhere originally, right? It came out in a magazine.
It was in a magazine, yes, and I can't remember which. It might have been in Michael Moorcock. I think it was in Michael Moorcock's thing from England.
Yeah, it makes sense because I think that like you said, Michael Moorcock. One of the things that he's most famous for is that period where he was discovering this whole new wave of talent, right? Like, was it New Horizon?
Yes,
the name of the magazine.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah,
I'm just googling it right now as we talk.
Again, fantastic research on our behalf.
But so it appeared there originally, and then I think it was published again in the US in a slightly expanded version. So it was very much a short story, and then it was he kind of expanded it somewhat. But I would agree with you that it's still a short story, really.
Yeah, but it's interesting how it seems to have, from the get-go, there's something about this story that's really resonated with people. And for me as well, I mean, we'll get to whether it all stands up and everything now, but my first entry point, seeing the film, is really seeing it on late night television. It stuck with me. Like, I saw it at just the right age. So there's something about this overall concept which clearly really struck a nerve with lots of people. And now, kind of trying to look back on it objectively, I was trying to quite wrap my head around what is it about this, because I'm assuming for you as well, right? Whatever way you first came across it, was it something that struck you as well? Was it like?
Yeah, I don't think I saw it as a teen. I think I saw it in my late teen, like 1920, around there, and it would have been my friend
You
Tavis.
saw it in 1920. That's amazing.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I traveled in time and took a copy of VHS with me, and Edison and I hooked it up. With
him shouting at you the whole time. No, you need a scat, Kieran.
So my friend Tavis, who is a big booster of the movie, but also of I guess underground and weirdo comics. He would have been the one who introduced me to. We mentioned it recently, like a Wonder Warthog and Gilbert Shelton and people like that. He was a big Richard Corben fan, and so again, I just can't remember whether he gave me the book, like the comic book first, or whether we watched the movie together. It might have been the movie. But in any case, I came to it having already seen several things that are obviously very much influenced by it, right? Because it is a bit of a Rosetta Stone of post-apocalyptic.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Movies, right? I mean, like, there's no way to watch The Road Warrior and not be like, oh, wow, there's a lot.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I was watching it and I was thinking, oh, is this where Mad Max gets? And the only other thing I could think of similar was that, but nowhere near as kind of insufferably pretentious for me anyway, although I know some people who like it, is that movie Glenn and Randa, which is from like 1971 or something. Like, it's what's his name, the guy who went on to make the Breathless remake, Jim McBride. It's one of his earlier films. That was the only thing that I could think of that was comparable, that might have been a big influence on Mad Max. But I think it's mostly because I don't think anyone saw Glenn and Randa, so I think it was mostly A Boy and His Dog.
Yeah, I mean, just the imagery of the wasteland and the bandoliers, and even the scene of all quite early in the movie of all those people dragging the car with the rope. That stuff is so
absolutely.
It still is. I mean, to some degree, even stuff out of the most recent, Mad Max Fury Road still seems to nod back to A Boy and His Dog. So it was. So for me, it was a bit of it was one of those recognitions of like, oh my, this thing I already love has this forebearer that's equally interesting, and in some ways maybe more interesting for being that bit older and being weirder. In a lot of ways. Yeah, I think so.
Well, let's talk about what the actual story is, because again, for me this time I was trying to approach it like, trying to wipe my brain of it and just coming at it anew. And so it's a story about Vic, who.
So do we want to deal with it in chronological story order, or do we want to deal with it in the order that it was written? Because then I think Boy and His Dog is first.
I think we'll just talk about what happens in the novella first, and then we can see how it. Yeah. So so it's a post-apocalyptic future, which is slightly different because it's post World War III in the novella or the short story, right? And
I don't know. I think that may have been adjusted over time as well. It's still World War IV, I think.
Oh, really? I thought it was the film that bumped that up. But okay. Anyway, it's fucked up future.
Yes.
Wasteland, and Vic is a horny young man.
Yes. Ages are interesting because in the novella he's younger. He's more like like 15 or 14. Like he's definitely a kid. And in obviously when they made the movie they cast somebody who was more like 24, 25 playing 18.
Yeah, I suppose it
does change. It's a bit more in that same way that Alex in A Clockwork Orange, right, is 14 in the book,
right?
But there was the way even Stanley Kubrick was going to
I
make
think
that movie.
it's problematic enough, right? You don't want to give yourself more problems when so
Yes, yeah.
yeah. So
But in any case, he's a teenager. We'll say that.
yes, and he travels the wastelands, basically looking for. I believe the phrase the young people use nowadays, Nick, is "poontang."
I believe so.
Yes, and
food. Both.
I've been doing my research with my pipe, like the beach party musicals. I've been going down to the beach and watching the young people frolic and making notes.
Okay.
And and that's what Annette Funicello
notebooks
says. And that guy, what is his name? Frankie Avalon. There we go. That's what they say. Is
right.
And yeah, and food, and with his companion Blood, who is a dog, which he has a telepathic link with. And I'm shit at dogs, right? Like telling them apart. And so in the film, at least, is that a Yorkshire Terrier?
No, it's hairy.
You go for calling dogs as well.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a cute, long-haired, shaggy-looking thing of some sort.
Yeah, and it seems to. I'm not sure actually in the, because obviously you can see it in the comic as well, but in the original story, is it ever specified what kind?
I don't think so. No, I feel like it's not necessarily. It's left up to your imagination.
Which is an interesting choice as well. They go for, because I suppose first off, if you're thinking about some sort of super telepathic attack dog, you would, I suppose, most people would initially think of a big,
German Shepherd, Doberman.
Right. So you do know a little bit about dogs.
Yeah, like military kind of, or police type of dogs.
Right. Dogs that look good in uniform.
Not Benji. Which this dog, whatever Benji was, I think might be the same kind of dog.
Right.
As this.
Right. But that's an interesting kind of choice. Although I suppose something that so in the novella, it's not a novella, in the story.
Right.
There's a few sort of moments where the dog kind of leaps into action.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you can kind of get away with that in the comic, and in the film they've just kind of had to fudge it a little bit because this little scruffy thing doesn't really look. Looks like it would be quite easy to just kick across the room.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. But they get away with. Again, this is just me thinking and spitballing in retrospect. While I was in there watching the film, it didn't bother me. I was quite happy to suspend my disbelief.
And anyway, that dog does wounded really well, which I think maybe was more important to.
Well, I'm hoping it does wounded rather than they smash his paw with it.
I would think so. Yeah.
Because there are some horror stories.
Yes. Although it does seem as well. I mean, in interviews I've read with the director L.Q. Jones, he talks about having tried to adopt the dog after they made the movie. That he was quite smitten with Tiger. And I also love in those interviews he talks a lot about how the dog really made Don Johnson a better actor. It was basically Don Johnson's acting coach, which is awesome. But yes, there's a bit of backstory here about how it's a bit of a a hand wave or whatever about how these dogs became telepathic, right? That they were bred. There was some sort of crossbreed with dolphins and highly sensitive sniffing dogs, and then they were used in World War III, I guess, which is apparently a war with China, as kind of napalm shooting death dogs.
Because they watch a propaganda film from that, which is massively racist.
Yes. Interestingly, not in the movie. But in the original story and in the comic version,
no, in the film they watch a bit of slap and tickle porno with L.Q. Jones making a cameo appearance, right? So he does have a bit of a Harry mustache.
Oh yeah. So.
L.Q. Jones, we should mention, who died earlier this year.
Oh crap!
Yeah, he died in July of this year at the ripe old age of 94.
Well, yeah, I mean that seems about right. I mean this is the only film he directed.
Yes, he produced some things
Right.
with his producing partner, this Alvin Moore of Green Acres, I guess.
Mhm.
But yeah, I suppose most famous as being in a bunch of Peckinpah movies. That's what
Yes, as an
more
actor.
people
Yeah,
will know him for. But
yeah, he's in Wild Bunch and
yeah, but he's in a whole bunch of things. He turns up he's in like Casino, for example, and all sorts of things. Very long, distinguished career. But yeah, so anyway, back to the short story. And yes, and so basically it's a fight for survival for food and I mean
occasionally getting laid.
yeah, it's interesting. We'll get to the controversy about well, we'll get to that then, I think so. But anyway, it's
Yes,
not
okay.
exactly it's a pretty misogynistic world, right?
Yes,
I mean, very much
yes.
class citizens just there to be raped, really.
I was shocked the first time I saw it, I think. Just because it was one of the first movies I saw where the protagonists were fairly irredeemable seeming.
Mm, mm.
And I remember being surprised. And you know, I had seen a few movies, but I was this one, and maybe the jocular, it's the movie more even than the book, the kind of jocular nature of
Yes.
their shittiness was
Yeah.
like, ooh.
Yeah, well,
And
we'll get
everyone,
to that because again, I want to, but let's just keep it
okay.
to the story for the moment, and
We
just
should say
yeah.
spoilers
Oh yes,
everywhere.
spoilers
Stop right
ahead.
now if you
Yeah,
haven't already seen the film or read the novella. Go do
or
both.
if you've just had enough of this,
Well, yeah, exactly.
for any of these reasons.
Yeah, please stop.
Um,
But anyway, go on.
I was just going to say it's because there's not really that much to it, I suppose. So yes, so there's this yeah, post-apocalyptic, you know, survival life of pure survival. He ends up finding a girl who he's kind of quite smitten by.
Yep.
Turns out it's a honey trap, and he
Yep.
ends up in one of these underground communities, right? So it seems as if some people have survived in these underground communities, kind of stuck in like an Eisenhower era kind of 50s America or something.
Yes. Yes. By underground, we don't mean like hippie.
No,
We mean like literally
underground.
down a caisson deep under the earth in this, and that stuff's quite cool because it's described in the book or in the short story, and then it is realized fairly reasonably by the movie. The idea that like there's no sky, it's just pure blackness, but they've built this whole little picket fence town under there in the darkness, where everyone's living out this kind of this very 50s.
Although for some reason, to access it, you have to go down like a missile silo, and then like what looks like I don't know all those endless corridors around the back of supermarkets and malls that you're not permitted to enter if you're not authorized, right?
Yes.
I'm not quite sure why they put all that piping in, and you know, but it's obviously it's the nearest they could get to. I suppose it serve a function. So again, it's suspension of disbelief, right? It's a bit like it reminded me of. Did you ever see that film? It was a Japanese movie called Marebito, which is based on what's his name? As a writer whose name I'm blanking, but he wrote all sorts of kind of Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith inspired like troglodytes living underground. Okay.
No, that sounds great though.
He's not. He's actually. He sounds more interesting than he is because I remember. Okay. Yeah, but the film is quite good. But there's scenes in that film where the main character kind of finds his way into the catacombs below Tokyo, but it's mostly like scenes of him descending like stairwells, you know.
Yes.
Like in supermarkets or something like that.
Yes. So the budget,
but it works. It works. You get the kind of idea. And you know, there are some stairwells in some of the larger like subway stations here when they're not crowded, you do feel a little bit like,
Oh yeah, yeah. When it's
you can
quiet,
imagine in the future if they discover this, it would be like discovering an ancient temple or something.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was always really taken as a child when watching Beneath Planet of the Apes, where
Mm,
they go underneath and they discover this chunk of New York that's like subsided under,
yeah,
and they're in the old subway system, and that was totally captivating to me. But it's also worth mentioning quickly before we go on that in some ways Vic and Blood are kind of outliers in this world, in that the smart thing to do is to join a pack, to join a group, and so most people are part of these rover packs of kind of wandering
yes,
teens and
yes.
so on.
Less
And
Planet of the Apes and more Planet of the Rapes. Ah,
yes, exactly. That's awful, Clive. So yeah, and then Vic and Blood are what's called solos, right? So that they are kind of, they're doing their own thing.
yes.
Yeah, and there's a guy called Fellini, who kind of shows up in the novella, and then he is mentioned by name in the movie, but it's kind of like we just see him at the very beginning. He's the kind of pederast dude who's got all the kids. He's the one who's shooting people out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
But he's not really a character so much in the movie, and he's not really even a character in the story. He's just kind of, he's there to let us know that there are these bigger groups of scarier thugs, I guess.
Yeah.
I did like
a
Our Gang.
Manson-esque kind of figure as well, right? He's gathered this
Yes.
family of children around him, and
Yeah, or a really sketchy post-apocalyptic Fagin. But then I did like Our Gang, who are the gang that just runs the cinema. I liked the idea of them, a bunch of kids.
I guess that would be us if we survived in.
Yeah, sourcing prints like, ooh,
yeah,
this one looks good.
Yeah, exactly.
Making the popcorn.
And they put on these. Although the one major when we get to the film in the short story and in the comic, it's like a proper movie
cinema, yeah, and it's in a city. It's not in it's not like a tent town in a desert kind of a thing.
But obviously the film's a bit stripped down because it was a very low budget affair, right? So I can kind of understand why they went that, and it's as good.
It works.
Yeah, it's not a problem. So it ends up down in this underground, literally underground, started to be used as a stud basically for women.
This is one place where the novella and the movie do diverge, in that there's a robot. Well, okay, I guess in the movie it turns out that the big straw-hatted dungaree wearing guy turns out to be a robot, but it's much more a standard rolling around on wheels with big long arms kind of a robot that captures him and brings him. And then, am I wrong in thinking that the whole like milking machine he's attached to, that's a movie thing, right? That's not in the story.
No, I don't think it's funny in the story. That whole section goes by pretty quickly. In fact, it's not even dwelt upon. It's kind of more alluded to that he's going to be used as this stud.
Yeah,
it's more just like, oh, I got bored down there, and then it goes past pretty quick, that section.
Yeah,
story.
I mean, I like the movie version is great because it's kind of like his comeuppance in a way, is that he's just attached to a milking machine basically, and then the whole weird thing where they bring in the brides to marry his little sperm capsules it's good stuff. And also the white face makeup, which is, again, the book makes no reference to all of these weird, because it is very like, it's like they're not even white enough. They've gone to the next level of whiteness where they've actually got white face paint on in this little picket fence Eisenhower world.
It's kind of like a weird reversal of like, imagine if the white settlers were now the Native Americans, right? So they're using like face paint in this kind of, but to be honest, that stuff seemed a little bit more just silly to me this time.
Okay.
And indicative of like, there was a lot of that crap in the 70s, right? That kind of cinema stuff. And nothing against it or anything, but it's interesting how now, like when I first saw that as a 13-year-old on a late night TV, oh man, because I hadn't seen so many movies that were, well, we'll talk about the ending, that didn't have that gut punch ending when you first saw it, or just weren't this kind of weird. Or so I was, really, it was one of the first kind of proper like cult films that I came across totally by myself, that wasn't
Right.
introduced on Movie Drome or anything, or I hadn't read about it. So it felt like, oh, this is it's my film. Like I
Mhm.
found it, kind of thing. And it was so it's it's had a big kind of shadow, you know, it cast this big shadow in my
Right.
mind for years and years and years and years. And then you watch it again and you're like, ah, okay. Like you've seen a whole bunch of other films and there's
Right.
a wider context for like, okay, this isn't quite the great unsung kind of, but
Mhm.
I feel as if I was precocious enough even as a young teenager to kind of know that even when I first saw it. Like I kind of felt that it was a bit threadbare and didn't live up to the premise, but
Right.
that was overridden by just by this feeling of like having discovered
Mhm.
a cult film kind of all by myself kind of thing,
Yes. Yeah.
but now it's it's a very compromised film, but still of interest. But anyway, so there's an ending. There's an ending, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning that again in the book.
We might mention the comic briefly at some point.
Yeah,
On
possibly
this
on
comics,
Bollix, Comics Bollix.
yes,
Yeah.
I knew this would happen.
Yeah. But well, okay. Let's pause for a second and just say that I do think that Richard Corben does a really creditable job of making it somehow comfortably exist in both worlds, the world of the film and the world of the book.
I would say, for me, the comic might actually be. I mean, if for some stupid reason you only had a few
Yeah.
minutes to live, and for some reason you decided that to spend that doing this,
Yeah, if World War IV was about
Yeah.
to happen and you needed to get a bit of a head
Yeah.
start,
I would say the comic might be overall the best
Yeah.
way to
I think it is too.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think it is too. That was my takeaway after all of this, having gone back and experienced all three.
I don't know
That,
much about Richard Corben. Do you?
Not a huge amount. I mean, I remember. Well, so I mean, he goes back to kind of the underground, right? So, and it's interesting. He exists in this weird liminal space because people like Bill Griffith, for example, who I also really like, he was very dismissive of Corben and a few of those other people. And his kind of thing was, well, the underground was all about pushing the boundaries of like sex or politics or whatever else you want, your Spain's and your Robert Crumbs and that kind of thing. And he was like, and you got Corben, and in his mind, they were just doing the stuff that Marvel and DC were doing with tits and ass. He was kind of like, yeah, this is just the same muscle man, power fantasy stuff. And then you just got some blowjobs in there. So he was like, meh. And you know what? There's probably some truth there. But I do think if you've ever seen Corben's fully painted artwork, for example, Den, right? Which most people, if they know of Den, probably know about it through the movie, the heavy metal movie.
Okay.
There's a section of that movie featuring Den, voiced by John Candy, who does a really creditable job, actually, of playing the teenage Den and the muscle man version. Anyway,
it's not about Dirty Den from EastEnders, is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and he's got a massive cock, like down to his knee. I guess that's where the name Dirty Den comes from.
They could never really broach that on EastEnders being a
no,
primetime show.
But anyway, if you ever have a chance to see any of that, it's magnificently painted. It's like it is that kind of, he brought that Frank Frazetta, Boris Vallejo kind of that before Bisley, right? Before or Bisley, however you say his name.
His work on this comic is really good. And
I like his black and white stuff, and I like his pen and ink stuff as much as I like his painted stuff. But his painted stuff is really astonishing.
Okay, you would say.
Yeah.
So outside of A Boy and His Dog, is that what you would say is the most?
Den is probably Den would be the place to go next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because again, that's a bit of a blind spot. I've never even seen that heavy metal or metal film.
Really? Damn, I've seen. I mean, I don't know that it's actually any good at all, but I've lost any kind of critical distance from having seen it so many times from the age of 14 on. I go back to it every year or two and just
much like me with Police Academy.
Yes, exactly. Maybe not the greatest film ever made, but
possibly not, but I do enjoy.
As soon as they step into the blue, yeah, or the is it the Blue Oyster?
Yes, the Blue Oyster Club.
Yes, da, 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 da.
Hilarious every time.
Yeah.
I can imagine the Blue Oyster Club also existing in the world of A Boy and His Dog.
Very easily. Lots of assless chaps, I would imagine.
Yeah, suddenly Don Johnson, the door closes behind him and
so and Don Johnson, I have to say, getting back to the movie for a moment, he's a revelation. He's not bad at all. And he really has to carry this whole thing. Him and the dog have a lot of the movie is just him and the dog. Which I think is impressive because you really do believe in this strange love, whatever it is, hate relationship that they've got. But anyway, just to get back for a moment to this, because when they're in the underground, so Quilla June Holmes, who's the name of this girl who has been sent out to lure him down underground and turn him into this.
In the film,
yes, into this milk machine. She comes off pretty bad in both versions, but I do feel like harsher maybe in the movie, more grasping, because there's no sense in the novella that she's brought him down in the hopes that he will foment a revolution and allow her to ascend to being top dog of this society, right? And but at the same point, when she goes off in the novella, it's like she helps him murder her parents, and like it's like she's full on like
but again, it makes sense within the context of this world, right? And so the interesting thing for me is, again, I mean, Harlan Ellison's an interesting chap, and I'm sure some of the things he was angry about are probably worth listening. But there's a few examples where Harlan Ellison just seems he's like just shouting at his own shadow or something. And I think the controversy regarding the ending of the film is a perfect example.
You think he doth protest too much?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. I suspect so too. Given that really, other than that line, which is I mean, but the only thing you can say is that the fact that I mean, should we? I mean, I guess we've already said we're going to spoil this, right?
I think we need not necessarily spell out exactly what happens in the ending. I think we can probably talk about it without talking.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
But yes, definitely. So because this is the thing, to be honest, I think this is basically what really got to me the first time I saw the film specifically was the ending, because I don't think I'd ever seen the ending of film to your point earlier, where two protagonists were just our kind of heroes like that, and it is a great ending. But what I don't quite understand is why Harlan Ellison, as far as I can tell, L.Q. Jones has just filmed Harlan Ellison's end of. That's pretty much it. I don't see any extra so-called misogynist twist, because it is deeply misogynist in the first place, and
yes,
it should be, because that is the world of these people. It totally fits.
Right.
So I don't understand why. Number one, why he doesn't think his original version is misogynist, why he thinks L.Q. Jones's version is.
I guess there's maybe two things. I think earlier on, I don't think there's a scene in the story where they kind of, I mean, it's all, the thing is, like, whether it's implicit or explicit, right? There's no explicit scene where Vic walks in and finds a girl who's basically been like cut up and left for dead by a gang of scumbags, right? And his only response is like, "Oh, that's a shame. Like, why do they have to basically make her so that she's not usable by me?"
Yeah.
That's, I mean, yeah, maybe
No, that's in the story though.
that is in the story.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah. There you go. So maybe it comes down to that line at the end and the fact that they both have a good old chuckle over that line, right? The line is not in the story, and there's no.
But I think by the time you get to that line, though, the line that's in the film that isn't in the book, that's just an extra gilding the lily crap little gag. The damage has already been.
Oh no, I'm well aware. The message is still the same message. That a boy's love for his dog. It's the truest bros before hoes ending of all time.
Absolutely.
There's no question about that, right? So
the tone is the same. I think L.Q. Jones.
No, I agree. It's highly problematic.
And then Harlan Ellison just didn't appreciate someone holding a mirror. I think.
Yeah, and the backlash that came, right? Because it was certainly much hated by second wave feminists, and there was a lot of kind of
But again, you wonder like how many people even went to see A Boy and His Dog in the first place. I'm wondering how huge a backlash it could have. But yeah, real storm in a teacup stuff. I mean, it's
right.
It's exactly what it should be.
And
I have other problems with the film way beyond that. That's one of the things they got right. For me, some of the stuff in when the whole white. I see what they were going for. They were kind of going for this grotesque caricature of, but that stuff plays. It just seems so very.
It's a bit broad.
These now, doesn't it? Like.
Yes, it could fit in with any number of those kind of that era of dystopian science fiction,
Right, or just it was enough at a certain point, to do that weirdy beardy stuff without necessarily doing it well. But now you can kind of look back and it just seems it seems to me like an unnecessarily extra layer of kind of surreal, which you didn't necessarily have to. I'm not sure if it is. I don't know. It's not a huge. I'd forgotten about that stuff.
Okay,
this time I was like, oh, they did that. They didn't really need to do that, did they? But but I still. It's an interesting one. To your point about the whole progenitor of Mad Max and stuff like that. It's certainly a very interesting film and definitely worth watching, but seeing it now in the context of the story and the comic, and like I said, I think comics your best overall bet. And then I don't know, where do you stand on the film now? Like, did you still hold it in as high regard as you used to, or because it's definitely gone down in my estimation, but that's just because it loomed so large in my mind because I saw it at just the right time. I still think it's a good film, but it's just I've cut it down to size, which was necessary for me to do. And maybe now I can approach it again. Next time I can approach it, and it might go up a little bit. Yeah.
So did you see? You must have seen The Road Warrior still first, though, right? Or no? Did you see this before you saw?
No, I think I might even have seen A Boy and His Dog before I saw even Mad Max, I think.
See, because that's where I think, because I'd come from it from having already been long in love with those first two George Miller films, that in a way it blew me away less, just because it was like I was more interested in it as this is weird, this is cool. So much of the things I like about Mad Max are here, 4 years before. But that world building piece of it didn't blow me away as much because I had already seen Mad Max.
Right.
So I don't know that it blew me away. I think, like anybody else, I was left with the with a slightly bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah. enjoyed bad taste as well, right? Like
yeah.
savored it because you
Right.
haven't come across that anywhere else.
No, definitely. I was like, whoa. These are not the even Mad Max is a dick, but nothing like Vic and Blood are dicks, right? You know, in the first thing, Mad Max is a family man who gets revenge. In the second movie, he's a dick, but then you know he kind of he's brought back to the fold of being like, oh, but he's a hero at heart. He's just got a crusty exterior. Whereas they are just purely driven by the primary, you know, functions of the human race, like food and sex. Like they are boiled down to, and then the weirdness of having the smarter of the two of them be the dog, right? The one who's more historically literate, the one who's more, you know, and that's what I mean.
Voiced by Tim McIntyre in the film, right? Who also sings the
theme. Not Percy from Blackadder, like I had momentarily thought. That's
a different Tim McIntyre or something. Like that.
Yes. Yeah, he's.
In fact, you could say he's a long way from McIntyre.
Excellent.
Peaked.
Yes, we should stop right now. Walk out. But we should maybe talk about the bookends. So after the novella, whatever short story, some would call a novella, comes out, the movie comes out.
Some people who are wrong would call it.
Yes. Yeah. And then a little while later, Harlan Ellison bookends the short story with two more shorter stories, really short stories. One called Egg Sucker and one called, I don't remember what the hell the last one's called.
The most interesting thing for me about this was I was trying to figure out what the etymology between egg sucker was. Why it was an
insult.
Because the only other thing I know that there's that movie Cotton Picking Chicken Pickers, and they have someone singing a song, "You dirty old egg sucking dog." Yeah. But so apparently it's a dog that steals eggs from chicken coops. So it's basically a low life if you're an egg sucker. Which it sounds like you can kind of feel that without knowing it, right? If someone were to call you an egg sucker, you wouldn't go, "Oh, thank you very much," you know.
No, that's cool. Thank you for doing the work.
Yes, although I don't know the etymology behind teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. I'm not sure what that is. I don't know if it's got something to do with Edith Massey or
Yeah.
Have you never heard that? Are you looking at me like you've never heard that phrase before?
No, I think I have, but I just assumed it was something to do with balls, I think. Yeah.
You did have a very special relationship with your grandmother.
Well, she was a wonderful lady. Yes. But in any case, so the egg sucker story. So what's one of the interesting things about these two bookends is that the middle story, A Boy and His Dog, the movie, it's not really necessarily clear. There isn't an overall, like, it's not a first person thing, right? So, but in the novella, whatever the short story, A Boy and His Dog, it's first person and it's Vic, the human, telling us the story.
Yes.
But in the two stories that bookend it, it's Blood, the dog, who is our first person narrator.
Right.
And then in the first story, basically, it's almost just like a little snapshot, giving us a little more about this world. Vic tries to get some more bullets by trading in food for booze or booze. I don't remember what the hell it is. Maybe he finds booze and he wants to trade it for bullets, and he gets drunk with another one of these rover packs. They insult the dog. The dog tears somebody's throat out.
They call him an egg sucker, in fact.
They call him an egg sucker, yeah. And you do get a sense there that, like, as much as Blood gives Vic a hard time in A Boy and His Dog for being a hothead, that he's also clearly they have more in common than maybe the dog would like to admit. He does seem to be a bit hothead. And then the last story clearly feels like a bit of a mea culpa, like everybody hates me because I wrote that ending for A Boy and His Dog. I better make it really clear that, unlike L.Q. Jones, my version of Vic feels real bad about what happened.
Right. Right.
Which I didn't mind, actually, because it's quite hallucinogenic and disturbing.
I like the Comix version of it quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I quite like both. I like the prose version and the comic version. Yeah, he's really haunted, and then it has quite a great shock ending too. That apparently is undone by the teleplay.
Okay. Yeah, I can't say I'm really that like I'm not like, I really must read that, right. That brings me back a little bit to what I wanted to. So having now experienced all these different versions of it, and the original short story is a good short story, I think. However, I'm not quite sure this distance in time reading it. It's a little bit difficult for me to judge quite why it was held in high regard, head and shoulders above. I mean, I've read quite a lot of other similar kind of SF, post-apocalyptic short stories, kind of as good, really. Like, it didn't jump out to me, my God, wow, this is the one. Like, it's good, but I didn't think it was amazing. But for some reason, some of those, I think.
But written that early, like, is it just time?
69, though. I mean, yeah, I think there was probably still stuff that had been written earlier than that. I'm not talking so much in terms of the shock ending of the story. I think the ending is the strongest thing, obviously, and just meaning coming up to like my thing is the premise. Obviously, this premise really, like, L.Q. Jones wanted to make the film version, and Richard Corben was driven to write the comics. So I suppose that's the thing that's a little bit difficult for me to like. I'm glad, like I said, I like the comics. I'm glad the comics, and the film is. I'm glad the film, obviously, when I first saw it, had a really big impact on me. So I'm glad all this exists. But just now, just trying to be objective about it and looking back, I'm like, why did this quite good little short story? Why zeitgeisty? Yeah, why was it so? Does it make sense to you? For me, it's not. I'm not negating it. I'm just surprised that. And like you said, like, there's a teleplay and there's like all these other things, and there might be another new version. I'm surprised that so much has come out of this little seed of a short story. In retrospect, so maybe I'm making too much. Maybe it doesn't surprise you at all.
No, I mean, it's hard to say. As I said, I do think that it, to me, and the look of the film, and also which I think is embedded in the story as well, is the look of the modern post-apocalyptic thing, right? I don't know that before that I've ever seen anything that really has that kind of bleached out desert, people dragging cars around on ropes, like that whole thing, like just how far we could fall, and then married to this kind of action narrative as well, right? There's lots of running around and tumbling and shooting off guns and stuff, and the screamers as well. Which I thought was really effective, actually. The movie, I thought it was a nice choice to not show them, right? To just have it to be so cheesy as just like a green light and this awful moaning noise, and yet you kind of fill in the blanks yourself. I thought it was, I enjoyed that. There was something similar. I think there was a lift from it done later on with Firefly. I don't know if you ever saw that. That was a TV series and then a movie.
No, I don't think I ever did.
The Joss Whedon thing. Yeah. But he did something very similar with a kind of and it is sometimes what's not shown is more effective than what is shown.
Yeah, actually, when I was reading this story, actually, and so this time around, I read the story, read the comic, then watched the film, and I was like, I blanked that. I don't remember that in the film at all. And then I realized because it's not in it explicitly. I was looking forward to the green monster, but it's not there.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think the world building piece as well. Like, it does feel like a whole world, yet built with so few pieces, right? We've got very few characters, very few props, and yet it still feels like it makes sense to me as a world.
I suppose that's the thing with the film as well. Is it's difficult to separate, as we've proved in this film where we were supposed to be talking about comics. It's interesting how all that stuff you're saying about the world building and stuff, but that's us seeing the story through the lens of the film.
Of the
I'm not
movie,
quite sure if that works so much as a standalone.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's why it's interesting. I think it was a good move on our part to cluster
put it all together. Yeah, for
together.
sure.
And yeah, maybe we don't necessarily have to reach any conclusion.
No, if you're interested in, if you like Mad Max, if you play the, what are they, Fallout video games, this is a bit of the Rosetta Stone, I think, of a lot of that stuff.
Yes, it would be interesting. I would be very interested to see what a younger person, for example, seeing the film for the first time would make of it.
Yeah. And what was the follow-up that they did? It was on TV. My granddad used to watch it. One Man and His Dog. Is that what it was called?
Yes, it was the cleaned up version.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Nothing like watching a man whistling in a field.
Although if you get the you can now get the collected One Man and His Dog Blu-ray with the original director's cut versions, and there is full-on cannibalism at the end of every single episode.
Okay, well that makes sense. You can only look at sheep for so long before you go mad. What was yes, maybe we'll end there.
Enough of this.
No need to talk about darts, the other thing, and snooker. Those are my 3 things inevitably on in the afternoon in my house growing up. All right, it makes you long for a world where somebody's dropped the bomb.
I like darts.